Welcome back to another edition of Political Breakfast. We are so glad that you are here and listening as you do week after week right here on WABE. We appreciate you for that. Our strategists are here, Brian Robinson, our Republican strategist, our Democratic strategist, Tharon Johnson, and our producer, Lily Oppenheimer. So we all say hello to you, and I want to say hello to the gang. Good to see you on this Monday morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
No National Guard here in Atlanta yet.
Just yet, yeah.
Yet. Yeah, I'm watching all of this unfold and just thinking, what kind of America are we living in now where this is happening? Happened in D.C., now threats of it happening in Chicago. And, Atlanta may end up on that list. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
What we heard over the weekend was not about National Guard being activated in Georgia to assist with regular crime fighting like what we've seen in D.C. It was very specifically for providing logistics and support to ICE in its immigration enforcement. So it would not be direct law enforcement. We're going to start getting into a real constitutional question about the ability of the president and the use of the National Guard when it comes to law enforcement efforts. You're seeing some states, even Republican states, saying, our National Guard is not going to be involved in law enforcement because that's not their purpose. We've seen Governor Kemp come out with a statement that didn't say exactly what he would do, but he did say he would be a partner to President Trump when it comes to enforcing our nation's immigration laws. So that does suggest that Governor Kemp is going to allow National Guard to be used in some capacity. Now, this is not without precedent. We know that in the past, Republican governors of Georgia have sent National Guard's troops to the border to assist in beefing up the border patrol there. Other states have done so as well. So we do have precedent in having National Guard involved in immigration issues. If it came down to law enforcement, like what they have in D.C., I think that might put Brian Kemp in a different posture. I think that as chairman of the Republican Governors Association, he would have an outsized influence and a really big voice in how Republican governors around the country react to that. I think many Republican governors would be like, salute, yes, sir. We'll put National Guard on the street and help keep communities safe. I think others might, particularly those who are in second terms and not facing a reelect, perhaps those like Mike DeWine in Ohio, who are kind of beyond politics at this juncture in their career, might say, National Guard in the states answer to the governor, not to the president. And I am going to determine whether or not National Guard is used. And in this case, I say no. There may be a few who do that. But I do think by and large, Republican governors will fall in line with President Trump if he's able to make the argument that this is needed for public safety. And that may be different state by state.
Is this needed for public safety, Tharon?
Lisa, there's crime, then there's crime statistics, and then there's the perception of crime. And the common thread that we're seeing with this president and the cities that he is mentioning as far as we need National Guard are all black mayors. All right. And they're all black Democratic mayors. If B-Rob is saying that he's looking at Atlanta because of the immigration enforcement, ICE enforcement, then that's the first I heard of this, because what it's been in other cities is that the cities are not safe. The cities' crime rates are through the roof. It's not a safe place to be. It's not under great leadership. Well, that's not the case in Atlanta. Violent crime is down. Overall crime is down in Baltimore, other cities. But let's bring it home to Georgia. So there were some reports that Savannah was on the list. And now Atlanta is on the list. So I am being told by, unconfirmed sources and that this has got to be some retaliatory effort on behalf of President Trump by him attacking black mayors, because that's the only thing you can really come up with, because there's not other cities that he's targeting to do what he is trying to do. And so the reason I started off my comments about crime statistics, and then the perception of crime is because if it's about crime, crime is down. And if it's about crime statistics, prove it, because the crime is down. But what he's really doing here, Lisa, is this perception that Atlanta is not safe, Savannah is not safe, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., which I was just in the DMV, right? D.C., Maryland, Virginia. Was there 4 days on the ARC link trip. And shout out to the Atlanta Region Commission, who did a great job of taking some of the best and brightest, most powerful leaders from around the region. And Mayor Dickens is the chair of the board. Lisa and B-Rob, it was not until the last night that I actually saw DEA, National Guard, people on the streets. And they were in D.C. near the wharf area. But when you were in those areas of D.C. and pretty much on the outskirts, there was not really a big presence there. So the people in D.C. pushed back aggressively against the president. So I just think, Lisa, you just got to call it what it is. I think, and I'm not saying this is true, but it's what I feel, and it's what is sort of percolating amongst my circles, is this, and I'm just going to raise a question, a retaliation on this president to target black mayors, particularly the African American Mayors Association, where all these black mayors have convened, and some of them have been very critical of the president's policies. And for him now to utilize resources that is supposed to be for disasters and for state of emergencies, not for them to go out and protect civilians. That's what we have police departments for. And I will repeat John Ossoff. He said this at the Rotary recently. This is not even popular amongst law enforcement, amongst the National Guard, amongst the people. They don't want to go out here and do the jobs of the women and men in these police departments. And so we'll see what happens. Our RGA was in town this week. They were all at the golf tournament. B-Rob, they let me in. I went by the suite.
Yeah, right.
And it was all white, Lily. Like this Lily White, no pun intended, Lily, our producer. I think I was the only black person in there. But it was good to see some of our friends. And so we'll see, what Brian Kemp does. And I did miss the governor and first lady, but they knew I was in the building, in the suite. They were in the suite. But we'll just see what happens.
All right. Well, here at home, we've had some developing news with our friend, Geoff Duncan, right? Last time we talked about him, he had switched parties officially from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. And now there's talk of him possibly running for governor. Is this talk too soon, do you think?
I'll start because Tharon's going to be a more authoritative voice now that Geoff has left my fold and joined his. I will say I do talk to a lot of Democrats, just as Tharon talked to a bunch of Republicans, including going to suites and golf tournaments with a bunch of Republicans. And I'm yet to find a Democrat who thinks this is a great idea, who thinks that Geoff should be, next in line here. Now, granted, that next in line thing is an insider construct, not necessarily something that the average voter thinks about or cares about. And in fact, outsiders sometimes have a strong argument to make, sort of breaking through the establishment. Geoff's not an outsider, but he's an outsider to the Democratic establishment. And, we'll see what kind of appeal that he has. What kind of message does he have? But I have friends who are like, why doesn't he run for office down ballot as a Democrat? Why doesn't he just go out, spend this next cycle being on the front lines for Democrats? We have a very competitive race coming up here for governor, for U.S. Senate, and on down the list of constitutional offices. Like, prove yourself as a Democrat first, and then think about running for governor. One thing I have heard in the rumor mill, and Tharon can confirm or deny, but I've heard it from good sources, is that Geoff Duncan and State Senator Sonia Halpern, who has a good bit of respect amongst her colleagues in the General Assembly, have been thinking of running as a ticket. And of course, that's not how we do things in Georgia. The lieutenant governor is independently elected of the governor. And this is something that maybe would be mutually beneficial to both of them. I guess that would be the theory behind it, that he's a white man in a primary dominated by black women. You would be pairing him with a prominent black woman in the state, someone who, again, does have some respect in the General Assembly across both aisles, across the aisle. So I think that's an interesting thing. I just don't know that it's going to sell, and I don't know what's in it for Sonia Halpern other than, Geoff Duncan has a lot of money that's going to be spent and it's going to lift her, and some of it will be used to benefit her campaign. Because even as a ticket, running quote unquote as a ticket, you still have to run independently under our law. There is no ticket, you got to run on your own campaign. So what does she get out of that deal? I don't know. And I don't know how far along the process that is, but apparently this is something discussed a lot within Democrat circles.
I don't know, Tharon, what about you? Is the timing off? Does it sound a little too calculated? What?
All of the above. I mean, let's just start with what B-Rob just said. Yes, that rumor is out there, but I'm going to be very fair to the senator because I have not spoken to her. No one close to her has confirmed that that is the case. When I've asked some people who are close to her, they say that she's thinking about running for a higher office. They haven't confirmed it, but that rumor is out there. And let me just take it a step further. And B-Rob is kind of raising the question, why is that even a possibility? Because you're right, both of them have to run independently. Well, Lisa, I went to Buckhead Church this weekend, and Andy Stanley is the senior pastor at North Point Ministries, and Joel Thomas is the lead pastor at Buckhead Church. And Andy Stanley actually gave a really good sermon, and it was about not missing out, right? It's about not missing God and not missing this moment. And he talked about a balance of truth and grace, bringing truth and grace in a lived experience, and don't shame and disgrace sinners. Now, I'm not calling Geoff Duncan a sinner, but I think y'all know where I'm going with this. So after hearing that sermon and after just having this, I also posed a question, and it was a part of his sermon. He said, what's the way forward for us? And that's the question that Democrats have got to answer, right? What is the way forward for us? How do we win? So there's a couple of theories out there. Number one, Geoff Duncan is not just a former Republican. Geoff Duncan is a conservative Republican who championed some very, very conservative measures while lieutenant governor. I mean, you're talking about right of the right. That guy not only supported it, he championed it, right? I'm sure there's votes that he made when he was in the House that were very conservative. We start to see him changing towards the last year of his tenure as lieutenant governor, and he left the party. He abandoned them. Now, B-Rob said there's not a Democrat out there who thinks it's a good idea. That's absolutely true. There's not a Republican out here that thinks it's a good idea either. When I tell you the Republicans I talk to, they use the word opportunistic. They use, the phrase like the gall of this guy, right? To think that he can just go and just leave a party which elected him, right? They elected him as a Republican. They gave him money. He raised money, and he can just run to the Democratic Party of Georgia. Now, I do want to thank Geoff Duncan publicly for what he did during the Biden-Harris campaign and also during the convention and also for Kamala Harris. All those things are honorable. We appreciate you joining this movement. But this movement to stop the MAGA right radical movement has been underway for some time. And so the fact that he actually just wants to run as a Democrat, I have a problem with that. Now, if he said to me, Lisa, hey, I want to help Democrats get elected, to Brian's point, he can run against Rich McCormick. He can run for one of these other congressional seats. He doesn't have to live in the district in order to run. He can start lower level. But, if he wanted to help Democrats get elected all across the state, I will welcome that. All right. Because I do think he has value add. He's a white male, now former Republican with a lot of money, who's married. He's a good, Christian man. That's why I started off with my biblical, because I think he can relate to that, because he talked about how he wants to love thy neighbor. That was his whole rationale why he had this awakening. But if he wants to use all that experience to come help us get elections, win elections, I welcome it, Lisa. It's when he now wants to say, I want to run. And I've said this before. We got plenty of good candidates running for governor right now, Democratic side. All of them. All of them have their qualities. All of them have strengths. I truly believe that based on what we've talked about on this show, if you really want to talk about electability, I think that, Michael Thurmond is that person that gives us that electability in November. Yes, I said it. And I just go back and ask the Democrats, what's the way forward for us, right? And we got to be focused on winning in November. And I'll wrap this up by saying this. B-Rob, there are Democrats out there that believe that a black person probably can't win this election in Georgia. All right, let's just go ahead and call it what it is. So there are some. They don't talk to you because I know you're very particular about the sisters and brothers who you talk to in the black community. But there are some out there, elitists.
Am I? I would love to hear a deep dive on your thoughts on.
You just they come up to you. They come up to you and call you B-Rob. Some of the brothers, I was at the golf tournament. They come up to you, but you don't really deep dive in conversations with some of them, especially if they probably a little tall and fit the description of they could be violent criminals and stuff. I think you kind of walk away from those guys. But those are my people. Those are the folks that I have the most conversations with. But there are some people out there, and they're white elitist Democrats. There are some black and brown that believe that we need a white person to win next November. All right, let's just go and take it out there. And I respectfully disagree with that, because I think the Georgia voters are past that point about race. I really do. I think that in 2026, Georgia is a state that I think is going to look at people's qualifications, their content, or their character And yes, they are going to look at their race too, but it's not going to be the major thing on why they won't vote for someone. Yes, they look at their sex. Females we know have struggled to win, not just in Georgia, but all over the country, right? So sexism and racism does exist. But I believe the candidates that we have now are good. So, Lisa, I'm pretty much done talking about Geoff Duncan at this point. I mean, I think he's running. I mean, my sources tell me that he's running. And I'm just going to send this message to Geoff. And I'm going to echo my boy, John Ossoff. He told B-Rob this on this one time. The pool is open. It's cool. It's wet. Jump on in here if he wants to, right? And I think that he's going to catch some heat. I think he's going to catch, and I think it's going to be a distraction because it's not the best way forward. He hasn't earned it. He got kicked out of the Republican Party. He left there. Why don't you go try to go back to that party with elected? But it's to just say, hey, I'm going to come around as a Democrat. And it is crazy to me when I hear some of his supporters, whom are white, young white guys, I won't call their name, but they know who they are, come and telling me, well, Jeff's a Democrat. No, he's not. Like, you got to be a Democrat all your life. Now, you can switch parties and while you're in office, but you can't leave. And now it comes all of a sudden and just not have earned anything. Now, we've had party switchers before. Sonny Perdue, classic example, right? Switched to be a Republican. Nathan Deal. I'm going down the line, right? They've switched. But the climates were different then, right? And I think that you had, correct me if I'm wrong, B-Rod, when Nathan Deal and Sonny switched, did they switch while Governor Barnes was in office, right?
Deal was 95. It was right after Republicans took over Congress in 94.
Congress, okay. And then, but when Sonny was a part of a group of people who switched, like it was a bunch of legislators who switched that one year, I think after redistricting and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like it's never happened before, Lisa, but this is the governor's race. And I know some people are going to say, well, other Republicans have done it. Why are you hard on Geoff?
Switch and then start at the top. Yeah.
Yeah, start at the top. That's my point. You just got to, I don't care who you are, you just got to earn it. So we'll see what happens. But again, I'm not confirming
what does this do for that competitive field, though? It's already a competitive field.
Some of them I've talked to, they're like, bring them on. They're saying the same thing I'm saying. The pool is open. Jump in here. It's going to be, it's cold and deep statewide. And some of the operatives within the party, we're worried about it because it's going to now force us to have a conversation. And I think that Geoff, he really also maybe sees that Democrats actually have a chance to win this thing. I don't think he would be wanting to run as a Democrat if he didn't think he can actually win. But not just him, but like Democrats can win. And I don't know how much of this is personal. I mean, Burt Jones, oh my God, they would love to have Geoff Duncan in this race. I mean, I can't speak for Carr, Brian, you can, but I don't think Carr has any love for Duncan. I mean, none of these guys who are running have any love for him. I know the late Speaker Ralston, and may he rest in peace, that was my friend, so I can say it now because he's, up in heaven. But he definitely didn't like him. I mean, he started off every sentence talking to me was saying, oh, did you know that Geoff Duncan was a pitcher in baseball back then? I mean, it was always this joke, right? So, Lisa, we'll see what happens. But, hey, the pool is open, and if he jumps in this race, I think a lot of folks are going to have a lot of questions, and he'll be able to answer those. But ultimately, I think we're fine where we are right now.
I want to agree with Tharon on the micro look at the governor's race about whether or not there's a lane for Geoff Duncan. I agree with him. That's highly unlikely. I mean, what is his base? Is it white Democrats who are the most liberal, are the most liberal element of the party? Your in-town Decatur voters, your Athens voters, white voters. No, Geoff Duncan's record is, it rules him out as their candidate, right? They are to the left. So, and plus, white Democrats are not going to be like racially aligned voters for the most part. They wouldn't be Democrats if they were. So they're not necessarily going to go, oh, he's a white guy, I'm going to vote for him. So who does that leave him to get? Black voters who have got a bevy of experienced and credible candidates who are black running for office? I just don't know what lane that leaves for him. Now, let me disagree with Tharon on a macro level issue that gets beyond Georgia about whether or not this is at a good time for party switching. I disagree with Tharon. I think it is. I do think post-COVID and post-2020's fight over that election, there has been a reorganizing of the parties. We have seen people like Geoff Duncan, and let's break it down, white, Metro Atlanta, college educated, wealthier than the average person, those folks gravitating from the Republican Party to the Democrat Party. We have seen that. We've also seen Democrats gravitate toward Republicans based on stuff like vaccine policy coming out of COVID in 2020. RFK comes to mind. You saw a resorting of Democrats coming out of that. Same was true of Joe Rogan, a very big, important podcaster, somebody who got behind Trump in this election, somebody very influential with the bro class of voters, someone who supported Bernie Sanders in 2016. So not somebody who has been a traditional, small government conservative. You see these folks, there has been a resorting in the last 5 years, and I think Duncan does fit within those broad parameters, the kind of people who went from Republican to Democrat, and I've just named some who went from Democrat to Republican. So, that said, I still don't see the lane that he's going to get in this race. And I do think that he's got to prove himself for a cycle or two, build credibility, be on the campaign trail, let Democrat voters get to know him, and then he would have, he's still what, around 50 years old. He's around my age. So he's got plenty of time.
He could stand to sit out a cycle. Yeah. A lot of people think he could have said, he needs to sit out a cycle and get to know the Democratic Party a little better.
Real quick, Lisa, here's B-Ron why I respectfully disagree with you. We know that you know this better than anybody. If I were to run hypothetically right now for governor, just, say, hey, I'm done with the Political Breakfast podcast. I'm throwing my hat in the race and get out here. No, seriously, that could really happen. I don't want to scare Jennifer and everybody, but that could happen. All right. I go out here, raise millions of dollars. And if I run the traditional Democratic campaign in Georgia, B-Rob, you know this, I'm going to get, 47, 48% of the vote. That's what I'm going to get, right? The way we win is a base plus strategy. Geoff Duncan does not have any attraction to the plus. Who's he going to plus to? To your point, right? Let's just say hypothetically he runs as a Democrat and he becomes the nominee. He's not going to go out and get more Republicans. Republicans hate him. And the only way he wins a primary with the current field the way it is that he has to run some type of radical, crazy, takeover campaign, right? And just like white people, if y'all got one of your own in there against the other race, most times y'all stick with your own. Black people the same way, right? If we got credible black people running, and they're is great. But my point is the way we win, B-Rob, is that we got to go out and get those people you talked about. Last thing I'll say is this. There are no Democrats in Georgia that's switching to Republicans like that. I mean, Vernon Jones switched. But you showed me a Democrat, elected Democrat, right, or former elected Democrat that have actually ran and left the party. Let's make sure Geoff Duncan quit on his party, right? I don't ever really agree with Phil Kent on a lot of things, and you know that, B-Rob, but I do agree with him on this, right? It's hypocritical. He quit. And so show me a Democrat who's quit the Democratic Party, then wants to go run as Republican. I think that Republicans wouldn't accept him or her if they were to do that. And I just think that there are some folks out here, though, because our listeners to understand there is a movement. I don't know them because they don't talk to me about it. But, yes, it is happening. They're quiet. They're not talking to a whole lot of folks. It's this little quiet movement. We need this white savior, right? We need this white straight man, as you like to say, B-Rob, to come over and run. And I just don't think that's the formula because Warnock did it. Lucy did it. We can get those people you talked about, right? Michael Thurman did it 3 times. Thurbert. Burgess. I can go down the line, right? So we can figure this out. But it's going to be interesting to see. He's talking to a lot of consultants, I'm hearing. He's getting his black friends in the room, and they're giving him all this feedback. So he's going to be ready. But we'll just kind of see how it all pans out.
All right, another name tossed around over the weekend, Gabe Sterling. He stepped down from his position as Chief Operating Officer within the Georgia Secretary of State's office. What is this signaling, if anything? Brian, you've touched on this before. Where does he go from here? What does he have his eye on?
He's going to run for Secretary of State, which is the obvious next move for him, right? So it's a job that he's already associated with, not just locally, but nationally and internationally. Tharon and I are both former staffers for elected officials. Both of us have been campaign folks. Gabe has that background too. But what makes Gabe different than any bureaucratic staffer in the history of Georgia is he has wildly high name ID. I mean, we've never had a bureaucrat in a state agency be as well known as he is. I mean, he can be in California, New York, or Zurich, and people know who he is because he was all over the world. So how much does that translate? Now, because as I say about Keisha Lance Bottoms, she has high name ID too, but some of it's negative. A lot of it's negative, right? So, like, the more people know about her record, probably the worse off she is. And where does Gabe Sterling fall on that spectrum? Anybody who's serious knows that there's going to be some residual folks who don't like Gabe from the 2020. There's going to be a lot of people who love Gabe because of the residual coming out of 2020. But what is it in a primary? I think too many folks think that anybody who didn't go along with Trump in 2020 is a moderate. So we come out of 2020, all of a sudden, arch conservatives, Brad Raffensperger and Brian Kemp, are seen as moderate around the country. They code moderate. They are not. They are very conservative. They are definitely on the even more conservative end of the spectrum within the Republican Party. But it's all got to do with that coding. How does that coding impact Gabe, who has been in Republican politics since the 1990s, going back before Republicans were even in the majority? Like, he has been on the team. He has worn the jersey. He has been a conservative Republican. If you talk to him, he is not a moderate. He is a conservative Republican. And can that message win out in a primary? Does 2020 cause a lot of people to come out and vote against him? I think one of the great arguments for Republicans nominating Gabe Sterling is we are going into a really tough cycle, and Gabe is somebody that we know, we have empirical evidence based on what Raffensperger did, that he can get the deciders. That there are a lot of Democrats who aren't necessarily all that partisan, who don't always vote with the tribe, who are open to voting for him because they trust him, because they know him and they like him. And that's true for, I think, a big chunk of independents in Georgia who are a big part of that decider group. So Gabe can be an elixir to some degree, down ballot for people running for state house, Republicans running for state house and the state senate in counties like Gwinnett, places with higher levels of education, a little more affluency. Those people are going to like Gabe. Gabe's going to be a net positive to the ticket in those places in a general. So Gabe is almost a shoe-in to win in a general. I had a Democrat call me a few weeks ago and say that he was thinking of running for Secretary of State amongst other possible offices. And he goes, I would get in on the assumption that Gabe can't win a primary, that not going along with Trump in 2020 would be enough to keep him from winning. There's going to be too many people against him initially to even persuade enough. But if Gabe can't win, I can win. If Gabe does win, I can't win. I think the Democrat is right about that. Gabe is a sure thing to win in a general. The question is the primary. Can he pull it off? Is the name ID enough when the other candidates won't be able to raise millions of dollars because no one donates to a Secretary of State's race because you can't do anything for them as Secretary of State, right? So it's a hard office to raise money for. So if nobody can spend money
get
against
anything
Gabe,
out of it.
Yeah. If nobody can spend money against Gabe and run his negatives up, maybe he just wins on goodwill and name ID. I don't know. It's a fight in the primary. He's a winner in a general.
Is this one that Democrats care about, Tharon?
Yeah, it's the Secretary of State's race. And, we're going to have probably here soon one, maybe two people announced on the Democratic side. One person in particular, I know she's making calls, but I don't think I've been granted the permission to say her name publicly yet. But just know that we're going to have some good folks on the Secretary of State side. But let's get to Gabe real quick. Brian knows him better than anyone. B-Rob did a great job of explaining that. Seems like, Gabe has a challenge of electability. He's got to get through a primary first, but I do agree he would be a tough candidate to beat in November of next year. However, he owns a lot of the negativity that comes along with Raffensperger. He owns the positive. All right, because clearly we know that he was there shoulder to shoulder with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. I remember vividly, Lisa, him coming out and tell people to stop. And when he was talking to his MAGA right conservative people. You know, I won't call them his friends. I think some of them was his friends, and then by the time it ended, a lot of them were not. But him stepping up on that microphone, that moment, and saying, "Stop! Someone is going to get hurt. Someone is going to get killed." It was a time where Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and his wife were receiving death threats, and I'm sure the office was inundated with just complaints and threats. But you know, someone running against him like a Kelvin King and others will probably be able to exploit some of the things that Raffensperger's office didn't do that they think that he should have done. And they will criticize Gabe on being sort of the architect of doing some things that they can criticize. But I will tell you this. Gabe is a firebrand who, you know, I've never had a public spat with him. I think one time he added me on X and I added him back. It was just a little correction. But he's not going to be one that is going to run away from a challenge. He truly believes in his record and his work. He was a protector and sort of a, you know, offensive tackle for the Secretary of State. Can he then take all that experience and be a candidate for office? At the Capitol, we see him down there all the time. So as lobbyists, we expect Gabe. He's pretty funny, actually, a little witty. But how does he use that on the campaign trail? And then last thing I'll say, Lisa, is going to be the money. Can he raise the money? And will there be a lot of money out there to stop Gabe Sterling? And we also know that Brad Raffensperger has been rumored to jump in the governor's race. So you'll have Brad and his chief lieutenant, his chief guy, running on the ticket at the same time in a Republican primary. So much like we're hearing this could be possibly brewing on the Democratic side, is there sort of a common sense lane for these two candidates? You know, you had Brad Raffensperger this week come out talking about dealing with fraud and using like the Liberty case. So is that sort of a more angle for Gabe? But we'll see what happens, and it's going to be really good to watch.
All right. Before we get out of here today, let's pay homage. Two big anniversaries this week. You have Hurricane Katrina and the March on Washington. So any thoughts on either from either of you?
I would tell you this, Lisa. I'm actually on my way to New Orleans. This wasn't planned. I'm actually going down there for some business, but I was listening to NPR Sunday Conversation, and I was listening to it when I was driving around with the kids on my way to a Jack and Jill event. And yes, Lisa, that pretty much takes up our weekends now. I know you laugh, and you probably remember those days,
I remember
right?
those days.
Yeah, so we were, you know, on the way to Jack and Jill, and you know, listening and trying to get my mind right. But anyway, it is still horrific, and just it makes me just have chills when I think about what happened to that city. The people that died, the levee broke, and the special was about the school systems, how, you know, the school systems were already on the verge of trying to go through a transformational point, but how they went to a complete charter system, and some people criticized it, some people praised it. But Lisa, I just remember people moving to Atlanta because of Hurricane Katrina. And one of my friends, unfortunately, getting a little sad about it, she actually passed away, a friend of mine named Cyber. She's from New Orleans and dear friend, but I remember her telling me these stories about her loved ones and her family and friends. And so we would never, ever be able to fully recover from that horrific event. You know, people died, people's lives are not. And New Orleans rallied and they've come back, but it's still not the same culture in the same city. So, you know, my hearts and prayers again go out to the families who lost a lot of folks there. And I know this is going to be a very tough time for a lot of folks who remember that horrific moment where the nation was really devastated of seeing innocent lives being lost because of Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah, Lily did some fact checking. I think 100,000 at least relocated to Georgia, not the Atlanta area, but Georgia.
Yeah. And they have stayed in New Orleans to some degree, because when the Saints come to play the Falcons, the crowd is like majority New Orleans fans.
Right.
And I'm like, come on, guys, it's been 20 years. It's been 20 years now. You got to be Falcons fans. You got to be Falcons fans now. That's the thing. I know you're not. Yeah, they're not going back.
Got to change your loyalty. Yeah, because
they better be raising Falcons fans at least. Yeah. You know, but I do think that Katrina, where it mattered nationally in politics, was that was a moment where George W. Bush's second term administration lost a lot of public credibility, and you know, sort of like Biden with Afghanistan in his first year in office, it was one of those things from which the administration never recovered in public opinion. And I do wonder, when you see President Trump out there talking about the inefficiency and ineffectiveness of FEMA, how much of that thought began in the wake of Katrina in 2005? I do not remember before that Americans having such lack of faith in its emergency management agency. And I don't know that it ever fully recovered from that. And of course, since 2005, in the wake of way more hurricanes and destructive tropical storms that we've had, it really has bent that agency to the breaking point. And I say all this to say, I think that began 20 years ago in New Orleans.
It was a teachable moment for so many things, response. Boy, our nation's poor really got hit hard, in New Orleans and still not recovered from that 20 years later. Okay, before we get out of here, I'm going to turn to the March on Washington. People across Atlanta, across the country, are remembering the 62nd anniversary of the march. A lot of festivities took place over the weekend, and Atlanta's own Martin Luther King Jr. and his I Have a Dream speech continues to resonate. Tharon, what are your thoughts on that?
It always is highlighted by that I Have a Dream speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but I will always want to remind our listeners that there was so many other people and so many other moments that was pivotal. I remember a young John Robert Lewis who made a speech that day. He and Hosea Williams and Dr. Lowry and Reverend Orange and Lonnie King and all of these folks that Ralph David Abernathy's, all these folks from Atlanta were a part of the planning for this March on Washington. And we marched to Washington, Lisa, to fight for some of the same things we're fighting for today. If you go back and look at it, economic justice, we're still fighting for that today, right? Hold on, getting there. Jobs, still fighting for that, right? Unemployment for Black people in this country is high. It's actually higher than it's been in the last 20 years. We're fighting for equality. We're fighting for voting rights. We just experienced in Georgia, 400,000 people purged off a list. And I encourage all those folks, check your voter registration. If you got purged, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, this was pretty profound at Big Bethel, the historic Big Bethel AME Church on Sweet Auburn. Over the weekend, they had a social justice Sunday service. And it was specifically to honor the March on Washington. And there were a whole lot of church leaders there. And they stood up and they criticized Georgia's Secretary of State's office over the latest so-called cleaning of Georgia's voter registration rolls. Now, as you know, Secretary of State Raffensperger says he sent warning mailers to inactive voters back in July. But that still didn't set well with the church leaders and the audience. They said that, voters had until last week to respond before they were taken off the rolls and so on. With that said, a lot of ministers were involved in the movement then and now even. Brian, anything you want to say to wrap things up?
I would like to wish a happy retirement to Pastor Chuck Roberts at Peachtree Presbyterian Church. Tharon mentioned earlier this week him going to Buckhead Church. Peachtree Church is my church, and Chuck is getting a well-deserved retirement. Great guy, become a great friend. And I know he's a Political Breakfast listener because the first time he heard my name, he did a double take when he heard my voice.
Did he really?
So,
Now he has more time to listen.
Yes, yes. I told him we went to lunch, and I was like, we got a live event coming up, Chuck. You can't tell me you have a church event. I know you can be there.
You can make it. Well, yeah, happy retirement. And thank you for being a loyal listener of Political Breakfast. All right, guys, we'll do it again soon. Take care and have a wonderful week.